Hey everyone, this is Jordan with Food Bevy, the online community for food and beverage founders. And today I got a really fun conversation with Adam Pollack. Adam, I know you have a awesome background and they're doing some really amazing things now. So I'd love to give a quick introduction of yourself and all the things that you've done and what you've been doing. And we'll kind of dive into the details after.
Sure. Yeah. Jordan, thanks for having me. My name's Adam Pollack, and I have I don't know, kind of a weird journey into this. I guess like most beverage entrepreneurs, I started down the path probably 7 or 8 years ago. I was living in the Bay Area doing a paleo diet, which at the time was like not as in vogue as it became. And I started a business around spiralized and riced vegetables, which was an interesting idea. Turns out I wasn't the best guy to bring that to market. And some much larger players like Green Giant and even the grocery stores who could do that processing in-house were much better. But I learned a lot along the way. I kind of transitioned from there into a business that was much more focused on e-commerce because I was really fascinated by that. And right around the time that my first business was at its crossroads, Amazon had bought Whole Foods. So I just saw that as like this very big watershed moment and food really kind of moving more online, being bought online in a big way. So I ran that business for a few years and ended up at another crossroads there, as most food and beverage entrepreneurs do, kind of ran out of money, wasn't sure what to do. And I had an interesting opportunity to start doing some contract work for a company called Rodeo CPG, who's really focused on helping early stage food beverage brands grow, specifically their sales and their operations. And so I had this opportunity to kind of do some work for them, and that's evolved into this role where I basically create content for our clients and for the broader CPG community. A lot of it from many of the learnings that I've had out of running my own two companies and making a lot of mistakes along the way. So it's been a very windy path, and like most windy paths, you can look back on it and sort of string the dots together, and it seems like a very straight line. But certainly, as I've been going through it, none of it's really made any sense, and it's all seems like a bunch of random events. So it's been interesting to see how it's all unfolded for me. But it's been a fun journey so far.
Love about your background is really kind of exploring that journey of what it takes to start the food business, some of the learnings on what it takes to be successful, and then when are the times to pivot or change and kind of level up based on those learnings. So maybe let's roll back a little bit and talk about the first business of spiralized vegetables. Like, what was the kind of initial problem, and then how is the solution solving it, and then like what are some of the business model challenges that you ran into?
Yeah. So whether right or wrong, I always the businesses I've started have always solved a personal problem for me. So yeah, I've always thought if you can solve a problem for yourself, and if you solve a problem for yourself, there's a good chance that someone else probably has the same problem. And I saw there, I would go online and I would Google like paleo recipes, and I would see millions of hits for things that featured spiralized and rice vegetables, but there was no organic, prepackaged, ready to eat, very friendly solution in the grocery store to match up with that online demand. So that was like the light bulb moment for me. That was, I guess, secondary to me being incredibly tired of having like riced cauliflower all over my kitchen. So I was solving a problem for myself. I did a little bit of research, and then I realized like, wow, I think other people have this problem too, just anecdotally, right? Like if you're looking for a simple recipe to make some kind of like spiralized zucchini salad, like how much better would it be if you could just kind of cut out all the steps related to the spiralizing and just kind of dump it into whatever your recipe is. So that's always kind of been like where I start. And so that like for me, it was the same thing with my second business. It was um, a company that was centered around regionally inspired spice kits. I just saw people increasingly having an interest in bolder exotic flavors and different ethnic cuisines. And I felt like a lot of people, their grocery store was underserviced in that regard. And if they could just simply order online, that would help a problem for them. And for me, I was eating a bunch of spices at the time, and I wanted to make that discovery process easier. So long story short, that's always where I start. And then for me, I mean, I think, you can't be too precious with ideas. Like, I think I thought both of those ideas were great at the time, and I actually was able to get them to a place where I thought I had product market fit, and I thought the customer was there. And then inevitably, like, there were just challenges that I found, whether there were challenges with my own supply chain, challenges with the competition. But I've always been very willing to say, you know what, I was right. Maybe a year or two ago, I was right, but conditions have changed, and like, let's reassess. So I think one of the key things to do is like really sit down with yourself every 6 months or a year, and like just think about if where you are now is where you thought you were going to be 6 months ago or a year ago. And then 6 months or a year from now, like, do you think you can get to where you want to go? Because I think it's so easy to get into this like money pit of a CPG company where you're like, well, I've sunk cost fallacy, right? Like, I've spent $100,000 already, or my family is invested in this, so like I need to keep going. And it's easy to do that, especially with like you listen to how I built this, and you think like, oh, that's going to be me. You hear about these stories of challenge and trials and tribulations, and you're like, I'm going to be the one that makes it. And most of the time you're not, unfortunately. That's like, those are outliers. That's why they make for interesting stories. So I think the key is like really like being honest with yourself, and maybe having someone in your life who can be honest with you, and sitting down every 6 months and just like making sure that, yes, you may have spent a lot of money, but that's sunk cost that's gone. Like, this business isn't going where you thought it was going to go. So like, what are you willing to keep, riding that ride? So I think that's always like another thing that's been helpful for me, is just realizing that my ideas are not that precious, and that many people have ideas. And some people hit the timing right, and that idea goes where they want it to go.
So here's a quick question to interrupt you, because I think there's a lot of really cool nuggets there. So I was just reading a article today, actually, from a founder named Will Schroeder. He runs an organization called startups.com, which focus on like building tools for companies. He's had like 6 companies. And one thing that he mentioned is that, oftentimes it takes 7 to 10 years for a company to reach success. And that's kind of like one view versus the other side of like figuring out like when you are on the right path, but there's just some roadblocks, to when you're on the wrong path, you need to jump off. Like, how have you kind of personally experienced that?
Yeah. So for me, it's always been easy because both of my businesses were bootstrapped. It was my own money, or like a little bit of, friends and family money. But I've never been like I've never had a company that's heavily venture backed, and we have like very large purse strings. So that I always advise, like, every food and beverage business, given the nature of it and how like capital intensive it is, it eventually is going to need to raise some money to scale. So that's all well and good. But I do think there's a period of time where you can get away with putting your own money into it. And you should do that, because if you're going to ask someone to come along with that journey for you, and you haven't put $1 of your own money into it, how can you expect them to do that? So for me, like, I don't have super deep pockets, and I sort of like, I knew what I thought I could spend on my businesses, and every time I outstripped that. But at a certain point, I started, like, I was able to say to myself, okay, like, yeah, this sucks. We've spent this amount of money and we haven't gotten to where we want to go. But like, you made a deal with yourself where you said, this is what you're going to spend. And I think you've really got to think long and hard at that point. And that's what I've always done. Like, do I want to keep going here? And so, yeah, I think there's the monetary component. I think there's also like the emotional component too. Like, you started a year ago, you were super jazzed about this idea. It was great. You loved it. You're a year in now. And this is where, once again, like, you check in with yourself. Do you still feel good about it? Like, are you still excited? And most of the time you're not. Like, after the initial honeymoon phase is worn off, and you like are in the day-to-day thick of operating a food and beverage business, which most of the time is really unsexy. You are dealing with fires left and right. You're not growing exponentially. Your margins are horrible. Like, most of it's like not fun at all. And a year into that, once you're there, like, if you're just like mentally and emotionally drained, and you're tired of telling your story over and over again, that's usually like another good indicator that, like, okay, it's time to rethink what I'm doing here, and either change, like, pivot, do whatever, or like maybe this is just not it, and I need to like get back to something I'm passionate about, because that's the key. Like if you're waking up every day dreading the idea that you've like, immersed yourself in, then that's usually a pretty good indicator that it's probably time to pull the plug. That said, I mean, like, you hear this all the time in the world of starting something. Like, success is not dying, right? That's all it is. It's hanging on for another month, another 6 months, till things kind of tip your way, or you get a new big customer or whatever. So I do think that that is a theme that runs through every single successful startup. But it's also important to understand that, like, for every single successful startup, there are 100 that failed, and they failed for a litany of reasons. And it's okay if yours fails, because, like, most people don't have the capital or the patience or the energy to hang on for 7 to 10 years. So those are I think that the two main things for me is there's kind of the monetary component, and there's like more the emotional component of whether or not you're still excited, and you feel like you can keep pushing through.
Yeah, I love that, because even when you think about the companies on like How I Built This, and they talk about it, most of them like fully, like when their companies were on the brink of failing, they still like fully believed in the idea
Yeah.
and they wanted to see it through.
Yeah.
Versus we all have ideas that sound really good until we started doing it and we realize, you know what, like I don't care about this problem as much as I thought I did, or I don't quite know if I want to run the business this way anymore. And I think that's okay. And that's a good kind of transition point, especially kind of going towards the other side, which, we talked a little bit about before, but like product market fit and what that actually means.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's a key thing. Like, I mean, I think it's so easy to get so deep in and feel like you've like dug a big hole that you can't get out of. And I will say that anytime I've thought that, especially like when I've raised money from like friends and family, and I like was crushed by the idea of telling them I was done, almost always that was received like totally positively. Like, anyone who's investing in your company that early on knows that it's a lottery ticket. Like, they're likely going to lose that money. And that's actually a pretty good conversation I would have with anyone who's a friend or family. It's like, you can say this as gently as you want or as non-gently, but like, you should plan to lose this money, which as a founder is like a really hard thing to say, because you have to have like unflinching confidence, right? That your idea, this is going to work. That's what people buy into. But I think when that's okay with like institutional investors, with people who are not your friends and family. They want to see you looking through them, looking like past them, and like, like I said, unflinchingly, like thinking that this is going to work. But with your friends and family, I think it's really okay to be honest and say like, hey, I'm going to do everything in my power to make this work, but the odds are stacked against me, and I just want to like have this be upfront with you that this money could evaporate. And I don't think most people do that. I think most people just say this is going to work, and everyone thinks it's going to work, and then it doesn't. That causes a lot of stress. So that's a thing. To talk a little bit more about product fit, is that where you wanted to go next?
Yeah, let's talk about product market fit and covering like what that means
Yeah.
and what are some of the variables in terms of like finding that.
Yeah. So I think like the easiest thing to do with any like product company is to be product focused. So like when you think about like the like setting aside food, for example, you think about like Apple, like their products are wonderful, right? Like they're at this point, like they can rely on their products. They have such a brand for that. That's not like where they started though, right? Like they started with a customer pain point. They started thinking really, really deeply about like what's wrong. Let's use the iPhone as the example. What's wrong with phones? Like what's wrong with BlackBerry? Like really thinking about that customer, and then creating a product that would knock their socks off. And I think it's really, really easy, like, because the fun part is to like get into the kitchen and make the food product or the beverage product. Like that's fun. That's awesome. And like think about the brand and think about how it looks and feels and tastes. That's like all fun stuff. Going really, really deep on who your customer is where you should be spending your time, right? Like it's better, rather than saying, I want to make keto pancakes, it's better going out and like immersing yourself in the keto community, going on Reddit and looking at threads, like looking at what products are out there and seeing what's missing, and then doing the best you can, which is really hard early on, but like doing the best you can to really, really trying to understand what's missing there, and then create a product that serves that customer or fixes that problem. So I think that's a key thing, is like you have to start with a customer first and really, really do a deep dive into who they are. And not to like plug the content that I do, but I did put together a customer persona outline that I've used in the past for my businesses that I can send to you guys to include in the notes of this interview. But that is where I think like most brands make their mistake. It's like, I want to make better jerky. And it's like, the world may not need that. Like the world might need something totally different, or maybe it does, but like, if you don't have any customers, you don't have a business. So that's like, I think product market fit is sort of analogous to just being incredibly customer centric and really, really thinking about who that is. And in painstaking detail, like creating that persona to start. I suggest small brands just start with one, get as deep as you possibly can. And once again, you're probably going to be wrong, like to start, but that's okay. Like you want to figure out how to create an outline that helps, like it's basically a decision-making framework, right? Because if my customer persona for my regional spice kit business was Pam, so everything I did was like directed towards Pam. All of the marketing decisions I made, all of the copy I wrote, everything. So it helped me like have a frame by which I could sort of center my business around, which in the early days is super critical because you have very, very finite resources, you have very finite time. And I see it all the time where businesses are just like spread super thin because they think like millennials are their audience. That's like or their customer. That's a horrible customer. It's millions and millions of people. That's like really, really hard to target. That's like an age range of like 15 years, like so many different people in there. So that's where I think like that, like product market fit equals, I think, being customer centric. There's an awesome overview on this, I guess, by the CEO of Superhuman. Superhuman's a tech company, so there's some stuff in there that might not be a perfect fit for a food and beverage business, but the philosophy of how they made their, like how they quantified product market fit, how they wove that process of continuing to hone it into the fabric of their company, I think is super, super helpful. And I recommend like to everyone that they watch that, especially in the early days, because most brands think like, I make my product development is done for at least a year or two, and now I go and try and sell my product. They never like create the feedback loop of like having this ongoing discussion with their customer. Like, is this product right? Like, is it priced right? Do I have the right ingredients in there? All that. And so that I think is the key misstep that most brands have, is like there is no feedback loop from their products to their customer. It's just like, okay, we got our formulations done. We're going to move on to now selling. And then maybe 2 years later, whenever we have money again, we're going to release like new SKUs again and do R&D. And that's just like, that just is not the way to do it, I don't think. So that's, I would recommend watching that video. I think the key is really being customer centric. And that is like sort of the same thing as saying like really, really solving a problem, right? Not just making another product, not just like slightly improving on another product, but like understanding that people are voicing a concern about something that bugs them, and then creating a product that serves that need. And it's just very easy to get, once again, caught up in an idea and a product and love the way it looks and tastes. This is what happened for my like second iteration of my first company. I spent, after I realized that like we couldn't compete with the big guys basically spiralizing vegetables, I tried to create a healthier version of a condiment I loved growing up called giardiniera. I thought the world wanted it. I thought it was amazing. It was cleaner. It was better. It was in this cool little pouch. I spent tons and tons of money on packaging. People said it was awesome. Got it into the store and it just sat there and died. And it didn't solve a problem for people, or we didn't communicate that it solved a problem. Like it was like, yeah, this is fun to throw on your sandwich and tastes really good, but like it wasn't functional. It wasn't organic. It was non-GMO. It was better than the other product, but like the other product's only sold in Chicago anyway, and that's like the only place where people know about it. So like there wasn't a market for it. So I got caught up in my own head and I got excited and I went down this path and it was the biggest, like by far the biggest lesson I ever learned around how do you spend as little money as possible to get the maximum signal as possible, to get the most signal possible. So rather than spending $50,000 on a packaging run, how can you spend $1,000 on, really, really tight, like 3D mock-ups that you can, bring to a buyer and really get their feedback on, or give to like your friends or do whatever. Like really, like how can you be very thoughtful about the resources that go out for the input that comes in.
And you actually did that. You spent $50,000 on
Yeah.
packaging.
Yeah, that was a real number. That wasn't like one I pulled out of thin air. That was one that still cuts like very, very deep for me. So like that I did that. I spent that amount of money on packaging that literally got thrown out, which for me was like, that is never ever going to happen again. It doesn't matter if like I have a company that has $10 million in funding. Like I think you always like, just because you have money today doesn't mean you have it tomorrow, and there's never enough. Like it doesn't matter. Like money is sort of like water. It always seems to find its level. And like companies that raise a lot of money spend all that money, and companies who have a little money spend all that money. So I think that's the key thing to think about is like, if you are going to bootstrap your business and you have $50,000 or $10,000 to put into it, and you think it's going to last a couple months or 6 months or whatever, it's probably going to last half of that. And there are going to be all these things that come up along the way that you just don't expect, because starting a business is a confusing, unclear, convoluted thing where things pop up all the time. So I think you just always need to be thinking about like, how can I use, whether it's a lot of resources or a little bit of resources, like in terms of what you have today, how can I use as few resources to get the like anticipated result that I want? So to get people, like one thing I started to do as I moved to e-commerce was like, instead of creating a product, like a physical product, and doing all the R&D behind it, I would create like a listing for that product, and I would create beautiful 3D imagery, and then I would run a pre-order on it for 50% off. It didn't matter. I was just trying to see if people would actually pay for it without even touching, tasting, or feel the product or feeling the product. And that is like, that's a wonderful way to try and do it, right? Because like, if someone says, oh wow, like I will pay for this thing and maybe not get it for 6 months, and I can't even try it, that's a pretty good indicator that like there's demand for that thing, as opposed to what brands typically do, which is spend thousands and thousands of R&D on packaging and on R&D and all that, only to find 6 months later when their product is sitting on the shelf, it's not selling. So
That's totally true. So much brilliance there. But I think you're right. Like finding existing demand in the market is like first key, and that starts by talking and listening to customers,
yeah,
to what they're asking for and wanting, and then having like a hypothesis on, okay, will this product solve that need? And that's exactly like you said, all these low cost ways that you can test it out. And if it doesn't, you iterate with them to figure out what will solve that need. And that's when you find something that works, and then figuring out if people actually buy it.
yeah, yeah. And that's, I mean, that's in a nutshell. And the crazy thing about like getting feedback nowadays is it's like so much easier than ever before, right? Like you can go onto Amazon and just look at product feedback and look at the 1-star reviews for, like, let's say you do want to sell jerky, and you could go online and look and see what people are saying about the various jerky brands and what like 1 star, right? Like, and obviously you can discard the stuff where like people are like, oh, the box showed up broken, because that's not, the brand's fault. But when people say like, I hate like that this is too salty, or that this is too sweet, or I wish these ingredients were cleaner, or whatever, or I wish the packaging was bigger, there's like all sorts of nuggets in there. There are all these communities online that like fanatical people hang out in for various niches, right? So like I got super into bread baking like everyone else during quarantine, and I was very curious about like creating some products for that community. So I went and joined like every Facebook I could to see like what people, home baking, like sourdough, all these different like groups that you shouldn't go in and spam them, but you should just like follow the conversation, see what people are saying. There's tons of those on Reddit. Like Reddit's a gold mine for this sort of thing. So there are all these different communities that you can go and find people talking about this stuff freely, and there are like tons of nuggets in there. And then that I think is where you can start to like, yeah, test some of your hypotheses, and how can you do that in a really simple, straightforward way. And increasingly, like if you're making a product that's non-perishable, which is, I would say like the majority of food and beverage founders, they start with something that doesn't require temperature control because it's like a lot easier to manage. You can like spin up a Shopify page, you can run some ads against it, And you can see like, what's the traffic like? Are people placing a pre-order on this product? Like there's all these things you can do to spend. You could spend a few $1,000s and get a really good indication of like, should I spend $2,000 more, as opposed to like just dumping money in and finding out 6 months later you're wrong.
I love that. Well, Adam, this has been great and so many super useful nuggets for all of our listeners today. So thank you so much for being on. We'll have to have you on for another conversation to continue with these topics because I think they're super valuable for everyone to know. So definitely appreciate having you on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. This was great. I'll talk to you soon.